When the conversation of weird internet rappers arises around your stoner friends, Lil Ugly Mane is probably like the 8th one that gets brought up. Travis Miller was born on May 13th, 1980, who gives a shit, and started making noise in the underground around the early 2000s. Literally. Before he would become widely known as Lil Ugly Mane, Sean Kemp, Bedwetter, A9 Concuss, and Lord Master DJ SK the Subterranean Suspect, he specialized in black metal, industrial, and other experimental music, releasing projects under numerous pseudonyms, including Dreamo and the Stormy Guy, Boring Circumcision, Metallic Thorax, Enchanting Brass Organism, Misunderstood Mercenary, Fat Greg the Bread Man, and Cat Torso. I only made up 2 of those. Comment which 2 you think they are and don't look it up! A lot of releases from this time are now lost media, at least to the general public, but Travis has conveniently compiled a whopping 11 out of God knows how many projects on this release titled Register that you can buy on his Bandcamp. If you've ever heard a plane take off before, then you've actually heard about 80% of this album. The other 20% is comprised of a phone answering machine and 3 lo-fi post-punk jams that remind me of the most mysterious song on the internet. It could have been him all along. What's more interesting than the sounds of a lot of these tracks are the concepts behind them, as opening the lyrics on Bandcamp reveals more information about these records. Some standouts include the first track, which is an audio depiction of what would happen if there were only 15 Roses department stores left in the US. Soft Drift Side B has this weird write-up about an allergic reaction kink that actually comes off as really eerie when paired with the noise. And Majesty of Disease is a black metal album made entirely in FL Studio that was then recorded on a cassette over a Bible sermon. Most of his work from this era doesn't have a ton of replay value for me, even as someone who likes black metal and noise music, but it perfectly sets the tone for his mysterious presence in the future. He dabbled in hip-hop around this time as well, rapping under the name Young Gus in a group called The Legacy. An 11.5-minute compilation of their music can be found on YouTube, and other bits and pieces appear on other projects, which we'll get to later. Even this early on in his rap career, it was clear that he had a good ear for jazz samples and a pretty solid flow, albeit inspired by LP.
Permanent frowns, individuals that eat clowns. I'm just trying to make it catch residuals every time I make sound.
Travis wouldn't gain much notoriety until the early 2010s, when he gaslit everyone into thinking a former NBA All-Star was making rap beats. With the rise of the
brave new world on the information superhighway,
musical artists were no longer bound to geography when it came to regional sounds and collaborations. Vast collectives like New York's ASAP Mob, California's Odd Future, and Pittsburgh's Taylor Gang were arising during this time and extended beyond their point of origin, but it was Florida's Raider Clan that would send the most DMs to strand their way across the entire country. Artists like Young Simi, Little Champ Fway, and perhaps most importantly Space Ghost Perp, created hip-hop with a decidedly lo-fi southern sound that brought the 90s Memphis scene to a new generation. While Lil Ugly Mane was never an official member of Raider Clan, his collaborations with guys like SGP and a rare short-haired Denzel Curry would do a lot to draw attention to him. His debut mixtape under the name Lil Ugly Mane, titled Playaz Circle, would fit in pretty snugly with the Memphis revival, especially with tracks like Fucking What You Claim and Pay What You Weigh that have a similarly melodic flow to rappers like Blackout and Red Dog. While the production on this tape is a little dry compared to what he would go on to make, the lyrics keep it pretty entertaining from front to back.
She smell like somebody farted.
2011 also saw the release of singles like You Ain't From My Hood, which a version of appeared on SGP's Blackland Radio 66.6, and Bust a Sag, the latter of which is an updated take on Crunk with its fanfare-ish synths and repetitive hook, but put into the context of a trap beat. There's even a sick footwork remix of it thrown in on the single. About a month before dropping his breakout album Mista Thug Isolation, he would put out a short tape called Criminal Hypnosis that contained a few songs off his forthcoming album, as well as some unreleased shit from his back catalog, including Magic Potty Baby Bit. Mista Thug Isolation, or MTI as us cool kids in the know call it, is one of the craziest rap records of the 2010s. If the music that some artists from Raider Clan were making around this time was a love letter to the Memphis scene, then MTI is a deconstruction. Unlike revivalist records like Blackland Radio that stayed true to the compressed lo-fi sound of early 3-6 Mafia, Mista Thug Isolation is as loud and in-your-face as possible. The jazzy instrumental leads are chopped up and arranged in a borderline amelodic way that plays off of the crunchy drums and thick sub-bass to create something disorienting, yet irresistibly catchy. Ugly Mane is somehow able to sound like he's being swallowed up by the beats, while still having an unforgettably bold presence on nearly every track. It might be easy to label this album as a parody of hip-hop tropes with its comically violent and misogynistic lyrics, but I think of it it more as an experiment, testing how far these cliches can go before becoming a complete descent into madness. Each one of these beats is fitting to the different facet of gangster rap that's being explored on each track, whether it be the hallucinogenic and relaxing Lean Got Me Fucked Up that has the psychedelia of some old DJ Screw projects, or the stressfully frantic Maniac Drug Dealer 3 that puts you headfirst into this dizzying and violent soundscape. There's an obvious tongue-in-cheek edge to a lot of the tracks here, like the faux love song Mona Lisa Overdrive, named after a William Gibson novel, and Slick Rick, where he refers to his penis as his willy an uncomfortable amount of times. The three interludes that appear at the beginning, middle, and end of the album also give it a bit more depth by showing some emotional vulnerability. I mean, hell, the word isolation is in the title of the album, and he pretty much made this record entirely by himself, with the exception of the two guest rappers and his, mixing consultant. It's just interesting considering this ended up being such an important album for modern internet rap, an age you could argue is lonelier than ever before. But I don't know, this isn't a Prince E video. MTI would accumulate a cult following relatively quickly after its release, even being praised by artists like Tyler the Creator and Earl Sweatshirt. Even with all of this attention on him though, he was still a mysterious figure that didn't seem to want all of this recognition. Even today, the only social media he has is Facebook, which he hasn't posted to in a few years. He prefers putting his stuff on Bandcamp rather than SoundCloud or other major streaming services, though you can still find some of his stuff on there, and he's only ever done a small amount of live shows and interviews throughout his entire career. Hell, nobody even knew what this guy looked like until after the release of Mista Thug Isolation, when this video of him performing in a literal cave was uploaded in August of 2012. This same year, he put out some other projects, including a surprisingly solid free jazz album under the name Dale Krugler titled Mista Thug Isolation minus the Mista. That's a pretty well-paced 16 minutes of skittering rhythms and ear-splitting saxes that remind me of Peter Brotzman. He produced an EP with Supa Sorta Human, who had a feature on MTI, and it maintains influence from Memphis rap, albeit in a less cool way. Probably the most notable thing he put out this year, aside from MTI, was this EP titled Uneven Compromise, or
Corrupted by the darkness, you fall into an endless sleep.
If you can't read Italian. It's essentially one 11-minute track broken up into multiple parts, with a 15-second intro plugging the Little Sunshine EP, which I swear is dropping soon, guys. It's my most anticipated album of 2013. The intro track sets the record up as a phone call from a prison inmate, which is a good way of framing it as a cautionary tale about how far one can fall when they continue to feed into the darkness, compromising their own life for something that'll only give them short-term gratification. Oh hey, that's why it's called. We're introduced to this world with bars that are satanic and suicidal over these ear-piercing synths that are miraculously catchy despite the abrasion. I view the verses in this section as being rapped from the perspective of the prison inmate, which very well could be the Lil Ugly Mane persona, given this portion of the track sounds like it could have fit well on MTI, though I'm not quite sure if it's Travis himself speaking on the intro or not. More context is given to this chaotic mad world as the murky synths are swept away by a subdued piano that leads into the second act. This part is made up entirely of beginning with KRS-One and Ralph Smart questioning the ethics behind promoting such a violent lifestyle in rap music, which then turns into a commentary on corporatism affecting art.
Labels.
Taking your money.
I love how this part is being said in small fragments by a bunch of different rappers, as it not only emphasizes how this issue has affected tons of people, but it also acts as a parallel to the first part that ties it into the title. Signing to a label may seem like a lucrative decision at first, yet it ultimately chews up and spits out many artists in exchange for 15 minutes of slightly more exposure. The third part of this track is what people seem to rave about the most, as it's this detailed and densely packed story about a friend whose heroin addiction led to him murdering his children. I find this story to be easier to engage with when I'm reading the lyrics without hearing the song, as the haunting boom-bap beat and down-pitched vocals are a little too fire for me. The final part is an instrumental that sounds like music I'd hear on an elevator going down to hell, with its relaxing yet unsettling jazz sample. It ends things on a note that makes you reflect on what you've just heard and... Damn. This EP is viewed by many as his masterpiece, as it showcases his knack for production, storytelling, and conscious lyricism in a way that he hadn't quite before. In fact, this and MTI might have been a little too good, as the following year he seemed pretty fed up by all of the attention. He made a now deleted Facebook post that's been archived by this guy on IGN boards, stating that after a few more collaborations and one more mixtape, he's gonna be retiring the Lil Ugly Mane persona, as all he did was make music in his room that accidentally turned out to be really good. Shout out to John Fahey though. Oh! In 2013, he put out a few more projects, 2 of which were archival releases that made up the first 2 volumes of his 3-sided tape series, which I'll talk about more once we get to the 3rd volume. In August, he decided to squeeze out the last semblance of revenue that he could possibly make off of Lil Ugly Mane by putting out an ad for a t-shirt. Undoing an Evil Deed Blues was meant to be his swan song, but rather than being overly emotional, sappy, pretentious garbage, it's actually one of the coolest tracks he's ever made. Hell, I might even like it more than Uneven Compromise. It's an 8-minute song that goes by a surprisingly conventional structure, with the exception of the intro and outro. The whole thing is a chill-inducing ode to the art form of hip-hop, with lyrics about the cycle of creation and how art evolves over time via inspiration from other artists and genres. He does this while simultaneously talking about his own experience rapping and beatmaking as a hobby, and why he decided to quit after gaining so much attention. It's all told over a beat that perfectly bridges the gap between old and new school hip-hop, with a boom-bap-inspired rhythm underneath a cloud rap instrumental. It even uses trap hi-hats in a tasteful way that doesn't distract from the snares and kick drums. It then ends with a sample from an old folk song that's lyrics seem to symbolize the death of Lil Ugly Mane as an artist. Overall, I find this track to be a beautiful celebration of hip-hop, despite a few of the more cynical lyrics, and I like how he pays tribute to older artists like Raekwon, Big L, and Smith & Wesson. He would later go on to pay tribute to Jay-Z as well, because he never retired when he said he was going to. 2014 was a pretty quiet year for Travis, outside of this EP titled The Weeping Worm, that's a pretty slept-on set of southern prog rap bangers, and an album of instrumentals from his previous albums titled Absence of Shit Person, which has a cover art that I won't show in case you're watching this while eating. 2012 to 2015 was generally the most prolific time in Travis's career, as he was putting out new material while simultaneously releasing a bunch of older work from his back catalog. And nowhere are these older works better showcased than on his 3-sided tape trilogy. According to him, these are compilations of music he made mostly by himself over the last 15 years that he forgot about, lost, hated, or other people didn't like when he attempted to play it for them. Despite the inherently messy nature of these projects, they each have a certain flow and personality to them that make them feel like finished albums. Volumes 1 and 2 were supposedly recorded from 2008 to 2011, and as such are seeped in the Memphis-inspired production that showed up on Mr. Thug Isolation. Hell, Volume 1 actually has a few early versions of songs that would end up on that project. Some highlights from this album include You Can Sex Me, which sounds like a Baltimore club remix of the Jet Set Radio soundtrack, and Jesus Piece, which has a deep-ass spoken word part about the history of Jesus over a Viper the Rapper type beat.
The name Jesus did not appear in anything English until after 1617.
As for Volume 2, I find it to be a bit darker and noisier than its predecessor, but it doesn't really have that many standout moments for me, except for when that kid talks about Michael Jackson.
This is DJ Robbins, and he's gonna play a little few songs for us. I'm gonna take you Billie Jean, Beat It, Thriller, and Wanna Be Starting Something. Okay?
Hell, the clips with this kid got so popular that Travis actually released the entire tape he found them on his Bandcamp. Third Side of Tape is undoubtedly his most popular album in this series, and I think his talents as a musician are better showcased here than anywhere else at the time of this release. The nearly 2.5-hour runtime seriously flies by when you're listening to this thing, as dozens of completely different musical ideas are constantly being thrown at you, from old school hip-hop beats to glitchy electronic music, and even some of his metal tracks are thrown in here and completely maintain the momentum of the album. After a collaborative project with Nicholas F. and a bonus instrumental album, Travis concluded 2015 with what was supposed to be his final record, Oblivion Access. And man, what a great note to end on. That would have been. On Bandcamp, he describes this album as being the remains of his gamer girl bathwater that he'd been sitting in for 5 years, calling it a pile of shit and cum. While it's unmistakably a Lil Ugly Mane project, it feels like the complete antithesis of Mr. Thug Isolation. Rather than playing an ultra-violent character over booming yet lavishly produced instrumentation, Oblivion Access is more stripped back and vulnerable. He goes from a sex-crazed maniac to someone who's anxious and has never received an ounce of satisfaction from sex. A lot of the beats on here are abstract walls of noise that act as a decidedly uncatchy backdrop to the words that Travis is saying, which tend to be very bleak and nihilistic. There are some moments of catchiness, like the screwed up horn and piano samples on Slugs, the overbearing trap beat on Persistence, and the way this gospel sample is worked into Leonard's Lake, but for the most part, this album doesn't feel like it's meant to be enjoyed at all, at least not in the same way you would an album like MTI, or most other records in the genre for that matter. It's able to border this weird line between being arguably his most abrasive and noisy album so far, yet also his most minimal, as the vocals are more upfront than they've ever been. The final track here actually spells out pretty bluntly how much he hates everyone overanalyzing his art, while using a funny TikTok voice filter.
What's it all mean? What's he saying when he says it? What's the underlying topic? What's the motive in his message?
Yeah, what idiot would ask that? For the next couple of years, it looked like he really could have been retiring the Lil Ugly Mane moniker, at least when it came to dropping full-length solo albums under that name. In 2016, he formed a rap trio called Secret Circle with his buddies Wiki and Antoine, and while their time would get cut short due to very unfortunate things, they would give us the closest thing to a video interview with Travis that we're probably ever gonna get.
I'm out here, I'm doing this. You know these motherfuckers dragged me to this. So
in 2017, he put out his next solo album called Flick Your Tongue Against Your Teeth and Describe the Present under the name Bedwetter, and this may be my favorite album he's ever made. It's kind of like Oblivion Access in that it's sad, but I find the writing to be a bit sharper here, and I love how the buzzing ambient production brings out the emotions in these songs. It begins with a heart-wrenching story of a little boy being kidnapped, with so much detail being packed into such a short amount of time. Not only are the lyrics extremely vivid, but the up-close delivery combined with these cold keyboards makes me feel like I can see the breath coming off of his mouth in the middle of a winter night.
Break like nightlight, choking on his tear snot. Fear not, summarize the voice within an earshot.
When the hook comes in, it's revealed that this is a repressed memory coming from the narrator himself, perfectly introducing us to the horrifying world inside the mind of our protagonist. From there, the album mainly consists of extended instrumentals and verses about alcoholism, self-hatred, and existentialism. Stoop Lights has some of my favorite verses he's ever written, detailing his own rationalization for constantly getting intoxicated and even getting used to the flavor of his own vomit. The song Branch pretty much just consists of this one hook that's repetition drives home the constant anguish faces trying to find any meaning in his life. The real highlight in the tracklist here, though, is Haze of Interference, as Travis completely rips himself apart in a way I find comparable to Kendrick Lamar's You. There's something really chilling about hearing him talk in such a raw way here, as even when his prior music got dark and personal, it still felt like there was a layer of eccentricity to all of it that created at least somewhat of a gap between the artist and the listener. Here, though, he's clearly not playing any kind of character, as he completely deconstructs his entire career in the last couple of lines, and we also get a very rare mention of his real name.
You're never getting better. You're addicted to madness. You treat it like a muse. Are you happy now, Travis?
The dramatic instrumental perfectly matches the energy of his delivery and lyrics, and I love the way the sample from Jandik's What Did I Hear is integrated into the track. The album the sample came from is really great, by the way. He would put out a couple more songs under the Bedwetter name, including this fuzzy industrial dance single called Raging Bull, and a full-blown alternative rock song called Headboard that would later show up on an album by Lil Ugly Mane. Oh, hey, he's back! Volcanic Bird Enemy and the Voice Concern is a pretty big deal for Lil Ugly Mane, as it feels like something he's been building up to throughout his entire career. Not in the sense that it's gonna redefine any genres or that it's making some kind of grand statement, but just because it's something he's been wanting to make for a while. In this interview with Rate Your Music, he said that he's been making music consistently for 20 years just because it's something he likes doing, but the success of Mista Thug Isolation altered his creative process in a way where he felt more constrained. He then describes this record as the culmination of years of attempting to distill down all of the varied and contradictory musical influences and ideas he has into a palpable concoction. It's a refreshing take on psychedelic indie pop, as it's still very much rooted in the eclectic sample-based production Travis is known for, but now it's all being presented as a bunch of music box ditties and sounds that you'd hear on mixes in your dad's CD wallet. Is that what those things are called? Everything from old Dixieland records to shoegaze and downtempo electronic music is dabbled in, yet it all comes together really naturally. The music does most of the heavy lifting when it comes to bringing out emotions in these songs, as Travis's singing voice is a little monotone, but he certainly has his moments, like on the trip-hop influenced VPN or the campy, bittersweet tweet pop ballad Cursor.
I hope it's worse for you today. Oh, oh, oh. I want it bad for you today.
I feel like this album has the potential to introduce a whole new audience to Lil Ugly Mane, and make those who only know him as the Mista Thug Isolation guy see how much more he has to offer. I think Travis is one of the most creative and exciting artists to come out of the last decade, and maybe he'll continue to redefine his sound as the 2020s go on. As always, if you enjoyed this video, then you know the drill.
It's a